Hello, sleepy soul. The night is quiet, the world is asleep, and something is waiting in the dark. Before we begin, subscribe to the channel and write your country and current time in the comments. Now listen carefully. I used to think people came to coffee shops because they wanted caffeine. I know better now. People come because they want to be seen without being known. They sit near windows with their headphones in. They stare into phones. They pretend the table, the cup, the soft jazz from the speakers, and the rain outside are enough to make them feel less alone. I understood that feeling too well. My name is Lena. I was 26 when it happened, working closing shifts at a small coffee shop downtown called Marlowe's. It sat between a used bookstore and a narrow alley that always smelled like wet cardboard. At night, the windows reflected the city back at itself. Neon signs, passing headlights, umbrellas moving like dark little ghosts through the rain. I had taken the job after leaving my ex, Daniel. That breakup had not been loud. No dramatic final argument. No broken plates. Just years of quiet pressure until I no longer trusted my own thoughts. He had a way of making every feeling sound unreasonable, every boundary selfish, every memory unreliable. So I moved into a cheap studio apartment above a laundromat and took whatever shifts I could get. The apartment was always humming. Pipes, machines, the refrigerator, rain tapping the single window over my bed. Silence never felt silent there. It felt occupied. Marlowe's was better. Warm light, steamed milk, ground coffee, customers who said thank you and left. Mostly, there was one regular who came in every night at 9:40. Always alone. Always wearing a dark wool coat, even when it wasn't cold. His name, according to the cup, was Elias. He was polite in a way that made people relax too quickly. Soft voice, careful smile, the kind of eye contact that felt like attention at first, then slowly began to feel like study. Large Americano, he would say. One extra shot. Every night. No sugar. No cream. One extra shot. The first few weeks, I barely noticed him. Regulars were part of the job. The woman who ordered oat milk cappuccinos and cried in the corner every Tuesday. The lawyer who tipped exactly $1. The college kid who always pretended he wasn't meeting someone from a dating app. But Elias noticed everything. One night, while I was wiping the counter, he said, "You changed your route home." I looked up. "What?" He smiled gently, like I had misunderstood something simple. "You usually walk past the pharmacy. Tonight you came from the bus stop." My hand froze around the rag. "I guess I did. Rain makes people choose differently," he said. I told myself it made sense. Maybe he had seen me outside. Maybe I was overthinking. Daniel had trained me to distrust alarm, to treat fear like a personal flaw. So I smiled. "Yeah, rain does that." The espresso machine hissed behind me like it was warning me. After that, the comments became smaller. Worse because they were smaller. "You like the corner table because you can see both doors. You always touch your left sleeve when someone raises their voice. You don't drink our dark roast. Too bitter." I wanted to believe he was just observant. Some people are. Some people notice. That's not a crime. Then came Noah. I met him on a dating app, though I almost deleted the app 3 times before answering him. His profile was simple. No shirtless photos. No dead fish. Just a picture of him outside a bookstore, smiling like he didn't need anything from the world. His messages were calm. Patient. He didn't ask why I took so long to reply. He didn't push to meet. He remembered when I said Wednesdays were hard because Daniel used to call on Wednesdays, then pretend he hadn't. Noah wrote, "You don't have to explain yourself to be understood." I stared at that message for a long time. I wanted to believe it. When we finally met, it was at Marlowe's on my afternoon off. Rain blurred the windows. Soft jazz played low through the ceiling speakers. He ordered tea, which felt strangely safe in a coffee shop. "You look tired," he said. I laughed. "That obvious?" "Not obvious," he said. "Just familiar." That should have sounded strange. Instead, it felt intimate. We talked until the sky darkened and the cafe lights turned our reflections into ghosts in the glass. He listened like he had been waiting years for me to speak. When Elias came in that night, his eyes moved from me to Noah. Just once. Then back to me. "Large Americano," he said. "One extra shot." His voice was perfectly calm, but something in it had changed. After closing, I found his cup still sitting on the table, nearly full. That annoyed me more than it should have. I was exhausted. My feet hurt. My phone had buzzed twice with messages from Noah, gentle little check-ins that made the empty cafe feel less empty. I picked up Elias's cup to throw it away. The coffee was still warm. I don't know why I drank it. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I hated waste. Maybe some part of me wanted to understand what he tasted every night. It was bitter, metallic, too strong. I swallowed once and immediately regretted it. By the time I locked the front door, the rain had turned heavy. Neon bled across the sidewalk. The alley beside the cafe was black except for the tiny red light of the security camera above the back door. Then I heard the first whisper. Not outside. Inside my head. A woman's voice. I told him I was working late, but I wasn't. I stopped under the awning. The street was empty. A bus hissed past the intersection. Somewhere down the block, distant music thumped from a basement bar. Another whisper. A man this time. I still have the key to her apartment. My stomach tightened. I turned around, expecting someone behind me. No one. Only rain. Only reflections. I hurried home with my hood up, heart beating too fast. The whispers followed me. Soft. Layered. Like conversations leaking through thin walls. I deleted the messages. She doesn't know I watch her stories. I lied about where I was. I kept the photo. By the time I got to my apartment, my hands were shaking so badly I dropped my keys. They hit the hallway floor with a sharp little sound that echoed too long. I wanted to laugh at my own paranoia, but the whisper of footsteps from the hallway made me freeze, every nerve screaming that I was not imagining this. There were no footsteps. Just the laundromat machines below. Just my breathing. Just the voices. I didn't sleep. The next morning, I blamed stress. I blamed caffeine. I blamed my brain for being tired and damaged and dramatic. Maybe I was overthinking. I told myself it made sense. At work, everything looked too bright. The chrome machines, the milk pitchers, the wet footprints by the door. Every customer who walked in seemed to carry a secret just under their skin. Then Mrs. Alvarez, the Tuesday woman, ordered her cappuccino. As I handed it to her, a whisper slid through my mind. I know my son steals from me, but I leave the money where he can find it. I dropped the change. She looked startled. "Honey, are you okay?" I stared at her. She smiled with watery eyes and touched my hand. That was when I knew the voices weren't random. They belonged to the customers. Not thoughts exactly. Confessions. Things they had said somewhere. To someone. Maybe online. Maybe into phones. Maybe in private. And somehow, after drinking Elias's coffee, I was hearing them. Noah came in around 6. Seeing him calmed me. That embarrassed me later. At the time, he felt like a door I could close against the dark. "You're pale," he said. I think I had too much coffee. He studied me. Not like Elias. Softer. Warmer. "Come outside for a second." We stood under the awning while rain tapped against the canvas above us. His shoulder almost touched mine. "You don't have to keep proving you're okay," he said. My throat tightened. I almost told him everything. The voices. The cup. Elias. Instead, I said, "There's this customer. He makes me uncomfortable." Noah's expression changed slightly. "What's his name?" "Elias." He looked toward the window, where Elias had just entered. Dark coat. Wet hair. Calm face. For a second, neither man moved. Then Elias smiled. Not at Noah. At me. Inside, he ordered the same drink. Large Americano. One extra shot. His fingers brushed mine when he took the cup. A whisper filled my skull. "You drank it." I looked up sharply. Elias watched me. His face remained kind, almost tender. "You should be careful with other people's habits," he said. My skin went cold. That night, I didn't drink anything. I kept his cup untouched after he left and sealed it in a clean container from the back room. My manager, Priya, thought I was being paranoid until I showed her the security footage. Elias coming in every night. Elias speaking to customers when I was in the back. Elias placing small folded slips of paper near tables. Elias switching cups once when no one was watching. Priya's face hardened. We're calling the police. But before we could, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. You hear them now, don't you? Then another. Secrets are currency, Lena. Most people spend them carelessly. I felt my pulse in my ears. A third message came. Noah has secrets too. Ask him why he chose your cafe. I looked up. Noah was outside, across the street, standing under a street lamp in the rain, watching the cafe. My stomach dropped. For one horrible second, I thought he was part of it. Then Elias appeared behind him, so close that my breath caught. Noah turned too late. They spoke briefly. I couldn't hear them through the glass. Elias looked relaxed. Noah looked confused, then angry. I ran outside. A truck passed between us, spraying water over the curb. When it cleared, Elias was gone. Noah was holding something in his hand, a folded note. He gave it to me without speaking. Inside, written in Elias's careful handwriting, were 5 words. She trusts you. Don't ruin it. That was the turning point. The police tested the coffee. They wouldn't tell me much at first, only that something had been added to it. Something that could make a person suggestible, disoriented, and highly sensitive to sound and memory cues. They said it was dangerous. They said I was lucky. Lucky. That word felt obscene. Detectives searched Elias's apartment 2 days later. His real name wasn't Elias. It was Martin Vale. He had worked years ago as an audio archivist for a legal transcription company. He had access to recordings, depositions, interviews, calls. Later, he started collecting secrets on his own. Burner phones, fake dating profiles, hidden microphones, voice notes downloaded from public posts, customer conversations recorded from inside Marlowe's using devices he planted under tables and behind vents. He wasn't reading minds. He had built a library of people, their fears, affairs, lies, addictions, regrets. Then he used the coffee to make me hear edited fragments at the exact moments he wanted. Tiny earpieces hidden near the counter. Directional speakers. Sound cues layered under the cafe music. A psychological trap. He called it confession work. As if that made it art. The worst part was Noah. He had been real. But Martin had found him before I did. On the same dating app. He had studied him. Nudged him toward Marlowe's using fake profiles and event suggestions, then watched us meet. He didn't want Noah. He wanted to see whether I would trust someone again. Whether he could contaminate it. Control it. Name it. When the police arrested Martin, he didn't fight. Priya and I watched from inside the cafe as they led him into the rain. His coat collar was turned up. His face was calm. Before they put him in the car, he looked through the window at me. Then he mouthed something. I couldn't hear it, but I understood. 1 extra shot. I stopped working at Marlowe's after that. For months, coffee made me sick. Not physically. Deeper than that. The smell alone could send me back to that wet sidewalk, those whispers, that feeling of other people's secrets crawling through my head like insects under wallpaper. Noah stayed for a while. He was kind, patient, but trauma changes the shape of trust. Sometimes even good people become reminders of bad rooms. We ended quietly. No villains. No final speech. Just distance. Now I make tea at home. I keep my apartment quiet, but not silent. Silence gives memory too much space. I leave a fan running. Sometimes soft jazz. Sometimes rain sounds, which is ironic, I know. I still go to cafes, but I sit near the exit. I watch who watches the room. I never leave my cup unattended, and when someone notices too much too soon, I don't call it romance anymore. I call it data. That is what people like Martin understand better than anyone. A secret does not have to be stolen all at once. It can be collected in crumbs. A tagged photo, a voice note, a favorite table, a breakup post. A trembling hand around a paper cup. Enough crumbs become a map. Enough attention becomes a cage. And sometimes the person holding the key does not look like a monster. Sometimes he is polite, soft-spoken, patient. Sometimes he orders the same drink every night and smiles like he already knows what you're going to say. I used to think privacy meant having nothing to hide. Now I know privacy means having the right to be unfinished inside your own life. To keep some thoughts unrecorded, some fears unnamed, some pain untouched. Because once someone learns how to turn your secrets into sound, silence never feels empty again. Story 2. I remember the first morning like a scene frozen in rain and neon. The city outside my apartment was slick with early drizzle, headlights bleeding across wet asphalt. Steam rose from the street vents, curling around the neon signs of the corner shops, making the world look like it belonged to someone else. I had been awake for hours, unable to sleep. The breakup was still fresh, though months had passed. I told myself I was fine. I was rebuilding. Apartment small, quiet, a humming radiator, the faint jazz from the cafe downstairs leaking through the floorboards. And then the knock came. It was soft, polite, almost like the building itself was clearing its throat. I opened the door to a courier holding a simple paper cup, a latte, my name written in neat, looping script across the side. Mara, it said. I smiled, a little distracted. A small indulgence, someone thoughtful. Maybe my new neighbors or a friend from work. I didn't know. I thanked him, took the cup, and set it on the counter. It was only the next morning that the first note arrived. Folded, tucked in the sleeve. It said, "You will spill your coffee outside the cafe at 9:17. The woman in red will look at you strangely." I froze. I hadn't yet left for the cafe. 9:17 hadn't happened. And yet, the words were precise, almost intimate in their detail. I tried to rationalize. Maybe a coincidence. Maybe someone knew me. Maybe my mind was playing tricks, reading patterns that didn't exist. I wanted to believe it made sense. I went to the cafe anyway, coffee in hand. Rain streaked the windows, and the neon outside fractured across puddles. I watched the clock, sipping carefully, and at exactly 9:17, a woman in a red coat passed, glancing at me, and almost smiled. I almost laughed, trying to convince myself. Overthinking. Patterns. Just a prank. But the notes continued, each one more detailed. Private things I hadn't shared, what I'd worn the day before, my favorite song humming in my headphones, the way I arranged my notebooks. The messages arrived in envelopes slipped between the bagel and croissant tray, under my coffee cup, tucked into the sleeve again. I started noticing other things. Subtle movements in the cafe. Shadows that lingered just a moment too long. A reflection in the window that didn't match anyone visible outside. My phone buzzing at odd times, no messages, no notifications, but I could feel it vibrate. Then came Noah. He was quiet, kind, careful. He introduced himself one rainy morning as I was trying to ignore the envelope tucked in my sleeve. Dark hair damp against his forehead, coat soaked through, and a voice that was steady and safe. "You look like you could use a friend," he said softly. I told myself to trust him. I told myself it made sense. Someone safe, human. He noticed things about me that nobody else did. The way I stirred sugar into coffee. The song I always hummed. The exact page I paused on in my notebook. I wanted to believe it was coincidence, attention to detail. I told myself it made sense. But the notes escalated. One morning the envelope said, "You will drop your keys by the curb tonight. The street light will flicker." I didn't know how they could know. My keys had never left my sight. I rationalized. Maybe someone had been following me. Maybe cameras on the street, public or private, had been tracking me. Maybe someone was orchestrating a game. I wanted to believe it made sense. By the end of the week, my world had become smaller. My apartment, my cafe, my street, all felt like cages observed from outside. Rain became oppressive, tapping insistently against the windows. Footsteps in the hallway echoed too clearly. Humming appliances became loud, like a heartbeat in my chest. I began noticing patterns. Someone was predicting my movements. Notes aligned with reality always. My schedule precise. My habits catalogued. My apartment visited. My door lock checked. Every precaution rendered almost meaningless. I went to the police. I told them about the notes, the predictions, the impossibility of it. They took a report, but without hard evidence, it was only a strange case. I installed cameras, changed locks, tried to obscure my routines. Then the final note arrived. You will speak with Noah tonight. He will know the truth. I stared at it for hours, the rain hammering the window, the city lights blurring into watercolor. My phone buzzed. Noah was calling. I answered. I know, he said. Calm, observant, patient. Know what? I whispered. Everything, he said. The notes, the envelopes, the predictions. I've been leaving them for you, for weeks, to see if you'd notice, to see if you'd trust your own mind. My chest went cold. You? Yes, he said. I know you better than anyone. I know your routines, your habits. I know the songs you like, the streets you take, the cafes, the sidewalks. I watch. I follow. I care. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to rationalize. Maybe it was obsession. Maybe it was admiration. I told myself it made sense. But the notes had been too precise, too intimate. My life catalogued, predicted, orchestrated. I broke down. I realized the trust one had placed in him was a lever for control. My apartment, my street, my days. He had inserted himself into every predictable pattern. The notes weren't whimsical. They were surveillance. They were testing. I left the cafe immediately. Sirens in the distance, rain streaking the neon. I went to the police again, this time with a record of all the envelopes, the timestamps, the messages. The investigation revealed a network, GPS tracking, public and private cameras, metadata from my online activity. Noah was a pseudonym. The person orchestrating the notes was a contractor for nearby security systems, manipulating feeds, accessing cameras and GPS, leaving physical notes to induce fear and dependence. I survived, but my life was different. Now when I walk to the cafe, I look for shadows, reflections, patterns. Every door, every lock, every sound is scrutinized. Rain taps against windows with the possibility of a hidden observer. The hum of the refrigerator, the buzz of my phone, the footsteps in the hallway, they are no longer background. I learned that trust can be weaponized. Privacy can be illusionary. Attention can be intimacy turned into control. Even now, when the coffee shop leaves a note tucked in the sleeve, whether real or imagined, I pause. Because I know the truth. Someone can map your movements, predict your habits, and shape your world without ever leaving a footprint you can see. I survive, but I am not the same. And in the quiet moments, I realize the cruelest lesson. Safety is not a lock, trust is not automatic, and someone observing your life can feel like the most intimate betrayal of all. Story 3. The morning had that slow, uneasy calm. Rain drizzled over the city, soft but persistent, blurring streetlights into long, trembling lines across the wet asphalt. Cars passed in quiet, sputtering rhythms, tires hissing against slick pavement. Neon signs flickered in puddles, fractured into shards of green and red, like the city itself was fractured too. I sat in my usual corner of the cafe, a small table by the window, my coffee steaming in a chipped mug. The heater hummed beneath the counter, mixing with the distant jazz that floated from the speaker above the bar. I had moved here 3 months ago, a fresh start after the breakup that had left me hollow and exhausted. Every apartment, every cafe, every window in this city felt like a place I had to convince myself I could belong in. The cafe smelled of roasted beans and damp air, a comforting scent layered over the faint tang of rain-soaked concrete outside. I stared at my reflection in the window, lost in the muted world behind the glass. My own face looked pale, tired, a little thinner than I remembered. And then I noticed the first anomaly. Movement behind me. Not my own. I froze. The reflection shifted ever so slightly, a figure crossing the room, near the pastry case, but when I turned, no one was there. The cafe was nearly empty. A man by the register. a barista cleaning counters. That was it. I told myself it was a trick of the light, the angle of the window, reflections from the wet street outside. I wanted it to be nothing. I wanted to believe it made sense. I sipped my coffee. The warmth went nowhere near my chest. Then it happened again. A shadow moving behind me, but not attached to anyone. Smiles forming in the reflection where no one stood. Hands lifting slowly, as if waving, brushing the air that was empty. I pressed my fingers against the glass. The reflection didn't pause. It mimicked me almost, but wrong. Off by a second. A heartbeat. A breath. "Morning," said a voice beside me. I hadn't noticed her. Soft. Calm. Observant. I turned to see a woman sitting across the table. She had a warm smile, eyes that felt like they had been waiting to meet mine. "Do you come here often?" she asked, voice low, quiet, almost intimate. I guess," I said, trying to sound casual. My heart was hammering. She introduced herself as Mara. New to the city, or so she said, recently moved, looking for routine, for connection. Her presence felt grounding, comforting. I wanted to believe her. I told myself it made sense. The reflections continued. At first small, subtle, shadows flickering when no one moved. The corner of a smile in my own reflection, lingering when I wasn't smiling. Then more obvious, figures leaning closer, watching from places they couldn't exist. I rationalized. Maybe I was exhausted. Maybe stress was doing this. Maybe it was a trick of the glass. I wanted to believe it. But Mara noticed too. Not immediately, but later, as we shared a table and coffee cooled in our mugs. "You see them too," she said softly. I nodded. Relief washed over me. Not that she saw them, but that I wasn't alone in seeing them. Someone else, someone real, acknowledged it. "Some people can notice traces," she continued, eyes careful on mine. "Places hold memory. People leave impressions." I wanted to believe her. I told myself it made sense. The next morning, I arrived early, hoping the previous day had been my imagination. The cafe smelled the same, coffee and damp concrete, but the reflection was waiting. A figure at the back of the room, leaning against a wall, watching. I spun around. Empty room. I checked my phone. No notifications. No messages. Nothing. Yet the reflections were there, responding to my movement, mimicking my gestures, whispering in ways I couldn't hear, voices below the threshold of sound, just on the edge of comprehension. I stopped sleeping well. Appliances hummed louder at night. The fridge ticking, the heater, the city outside. Footsteps in the hall, fleeting, always gone before I could see them. My phone buzzed with messages from unknown numbers. Voice notes I didn't recognize. Whispers I couldn't attribute. Mara came over that evening. We sat on my couch, rain tapping windows. She brought tea in a paper cup, warm, comforting. She noticed the shadows in my eyes without comment. "You're tense," she said. "I think I'm seeing things," I admitted. "Maybe," she said softly. "Or maybe someone's making you notice things you shouldn't." The words caught in my throat. I wanted to believe her. I told myself it made sense. Over the next week, the reflections escalated. They began interacting with me, pausing when I paused, tilting their heads when I tilted mine, hands lifting when I raised my cup, smiles forming that didn't match my own. One morning, I arrived to see a new reflection. A man I recognized vaguely from the cafe, a former patron who had gone missing months ago. His eyes fixed on me in the glass. He smiled faintly. I froze. The barista arrived moments later. No one behind the counter, no one in the room. It was impossible. Mara began helping me track the pattern. Someone had been living in the attic above the cafe, observing, studying, feeding the reflections, subtly manipulating perception. Footsteps, whispers, shadows, all real, all orchestrated. I tried to rationalize. Maybe it's coincidence. Maybe the missing man isn't him. Maybe I'm overthinking. But the evidence mounted. Hidden cameras in the attic. Footage of patrons' movements. Metadata of the reflections showing deliberate timing. Audio feeds capturing conversations that hadn't been spoken yet. The stalker was precise. Invasive. Patient. Emotionally intelligent, observing my habits, my fears, my routines. Mara discovered his past victims, other cafes, other apartments, other reflections, other people whose reality he had quietly manipulated. The confrontation was slow. Alvarez, a detective with calm eyes, traced the signals and eventually confronted the man in the cafe attic. Hidden monitors, laptops, headphones. He didn't resist. Smiled faintly. Calm. You notice details people don't, he said softly. You carry the weight of what they forget. I just helped them remember. He wasn't joking. He was careful, deliberate, invasive without violence. I survived, but I carry the reflection in my mind. Every mirrored window, every glass door, every puddle holds a fragment of that experience. I watch reflections differently now, not just to see myself, to see who else might be watching. Trust is fragile. Privacy is an illusion. Observation doesn't need proximity. Boundaries are delicate. Obsession is patient. And sometimes, when rain taps windows, soft jazz plays from a distance, and shadows stretch just right across the street, I feel eyes where none should be, and I remember that survival doesn't erase the scars left by someone who knew you too well. Story 4. Rain was soft at first, a light mist settling over the city, turning asphalt into molten glass that reflected neon like fractured mirrors. I watched it from my apartment window, tracing shapes in the puddles below, listening to the hum of the radiator, the faint jazz spilling from a cafe across the street. My life had been quiet for months. After the breakup, after the emotional exhaustion, after moving to this city for work I barely liked, I had learned to exist in small, controlled routines. Coffee at 8, walk to the office, return to my apartment at 7, dinner alone, television on in the background, lights dim. Predictable. Safe. Or so I told myself. I discovered the cafe on a gray Tuesday afternoon. Warm light spilled across the wet sidewalk, steam rising from the open door. The scent of roasted beans, vanilla syrup, and cinnamon pulled me inside. I ordered a cold brew, black, no sugar, and sat near the corner, by the window, where the light caught the edges of the rain outside. The first time I felt it, someone's breath behind me, I froze mid-sip. Not a gust of wind, not a reflection. Warm, intimate, almost invasive. I turned slightly, expecting a person, a friend, a stranger, anything. The cafe was full, patrons talking quietly, the barista focused on drinks, and yet the sensation lingered. I laughed to myself. Paranoia, I thought. It's just the air, the way the heater works, my imagination. But the next night, it happened again. The same seat, same coffee, same warm breath over my shoulder. I wanted to believe it was coincidence. The barista, Alex, smiled when I came in. Gentle, calm, with eyes that seemed to measure, observe. Back for another? He asked. Voice low, attentive. Yes, I murmured, and I noticed how he handed me the cup, lingering slightly, almost imperceptibly. He became my quiet anchor. I told him about my work, my life, my lingering exhaustion from the breakup. He listened without judgment, offered quiet observations that felt comforting. I wanted to believe he was trustworthy. Maybe I was overthinking, but impossible details started appearing. He knew I took the same route to work every day, which window in my apartment faced the sunrise, the book I always read on the subway. He commented on my notebooks, the way I folded my coat, even a song I hummed under my breath one morning. Things I hadn't mentioned, things I thought were private. I told myself it made sense. He was just observant. The breath behind me grew stronger. Subtle at first, now persistent. Not warm, now almost tangible, close enough to brush my hair. I began timing my visits to the cafe, checking when he was behind the counter, when someone else arrived, when the door opened. It always matched. Then the whispers started. One evening, as I sipped my cold brew and the rain tapped in irregular rhythms against the windows, I heard it. Claire. My name. Soft. Measured. Behind me. I spun around. Empty. The cafe was alive with quiet conversation, distant music, the hum of the espresso machine. Alex smiled, calm, attentive. You okay? Yes, I said, voice tight. Paranoia, I told myself again. I'm imagining it. I left quickly, heart pounding. The sound of footsteps behind me in the hallway of my apartment building made my pulse spike. Every creak, every hum, every buzz of the refrigerator, every distant siren became amplified. I started documenting. Times I heard the whisper, when I felt the breath, the way his observations aligned with details I hadn't shared. Metadata on my phone, social media, minor coincidences, they all stacked into a pattern I could no longer ignore. One evening, Alex handed me a note. Small, folded, almost casual. I know you're unsettled. I want to help you understand. Come by after closing. I wanted to believe it was safe. I told myself it made sense. The cafe was empty when I returned. Rain streaked against the glass, neon reflecting in puddles outside. He led me to a back room I hadn't noticed before. Monitors lined the walls, small cameras tucked into corners. Feeds of the cafe. My table. My seat. Every movement I had made in recent weeks. I felt my stomach twist. I wanted to make you comfortable, he said. Calm. Observant. Emotionally intelligent. But I realize now you need context. Then it clicked. He had a twin. One always at the counter, the other unaccounted for. Swapping places unnoticed. Watching. Recording. Manipulating. Every observation, every intimate detail orchestrated. I wanted to believe he was singular, trustworthy, caring. I told myself it made sense. Weeks passed in a psychological spiral. Each visit to the cafe became a test. Every breath behind me, every whispered name, every familiar gesture became layered with menace. Social media alerts, emails, even small coincidences in the city aligned with the manipulator's observation. I realized the twin had been stalking me digitally as well, tracking my movements, predicting my habits, feeding information back to the cafe. The climax came quietly, on a rainy Thursday. I called the police, brought the monitors, the cameras, the logs. Evidence of digital surveillance, metadata, burner phones, multiple identities. Alex's calm voice, the carefully constructed attentiveness, his twin swapping unseen, orchestrating the entire experience. Everything was revealed. I survived. They were apprehended. Systems dismantled. Evidence collected. But I was not the same. The cafe now sits closed. Rain still falls, streets still reflect neon. Distant jazz still drifts through the fog. Every sound in my apartment, the floor creaks, the hum of appliances, footsteps in hallways, carries weight. I notice shadows, subtle movements, and every unexpected detail triggers a spike of awareness. Trust feels fragile. Boundaries feel porous. My memory of routine is haunted by the knowledge that observation can be invisible, manipulation can be intimate, and control can arrive under the guise of comfort. I sit by the window often, watching reflections in puddles, rain tapping softly, and I think about identity, privacy, obsession, and control. About the subtle ways someone can orchestrate your life without ever touching you. And I know now that the only protection is awareness. The only defense is knowing that someone could be breathing behind your shoulder, waiting for you to notice, or not. Story 5. The night shift made the city feel abandoned. Not empty. Abandoned. There was a difference. Empty meant peaceful. Abandoned meant someone had left in a hurry and forgotten to turn off the lights. Every night, the cafe glowed at the corner of Mercer and Ninth like a small aquarium. Rain slid down the windows. Neon signs from the pharmacy across the street bled red and blue over the tables. The espresso machine hissed like it was tired of breathing. I worked alone after 10. That was the arrangement. The owner said the late shift was quiet. Easy money. Mostly students, rideshare drivers, nurses, lonely men with laptops, couples pretending they weren't fighting. I said yes because I needed the hours. Because after the divorce, I needed anything that kept me from going home too early. My apartment was 6 blocks away. One room. Thin walls. A fridge that hummed all night. A radiator that clicked like teeth. My ex used to say I hated silence because silence gave me no one to blame. Maybe he was right. Or maybe silence was where I heard myself most clearly. And I wasn't ready for that. The first vanishing order happened on a Tuesday. A woman in a yellow raincoat ordered a lavender latte. I remember because she kept checking her phone and rubbing the inside of her wrist with her thumb, the way anxious people do when they're trying not to look anxious. I made the drink, called her name. Camila? No answer. The drink was on the counter. Then I turned to wipe the steam wand. When I turned back, it was gone. No woman, no drink, just a wet ring on the pickup counter. I looked toward the door. The bell above it had not rung. The woman appeared from the restroom a moment later. Is my drink ready? I stared at the empty counter. I thought you took it. She gave me a tired look. I didn't. I remade it. I told myself it made sense. People grabbed the wrong cups all the time. The doorbell was old. Maybe I hadn't heard it over the jazz playing through the ceiling speakers. Maybe I was overthinking. The second time it was a black coffee, then a chai, then 3 drinks in one night. Always after midnight. Always when rain pressed against the glass and the cafe emptied into that strange hour where every sound becomes too sharp. The hum of the refrigerator, the tapping of water against the windows, the buzz of my phone on the metal shelf, footsteps outside on the sidewalk, slow then fading. And every time, the cup vanished before the customer reached the counter. At first, I blamed myself. Trauma teaches you that when someone spends years correcting your reality, you learn to apologize to evidence. I checked receipts, counted cups, replayed the security camera on the office monitor. That was when I saw the corner table. Table 7, the one near the fogged window, half hidden by the rubber plant. On the footage, I placed the lavender latte on the counter. Then the video glitched. Just 1 second. A smear of static. When the picture cleared, the cup was no longer on the counter. It was sitting at table 7. No one sat there. But the chair was pulled out, slightly, as if someone had just taken a seat. I watched the footage 3 more times. The room around me felt colder. Behind the office wall, the ice machine dropped a tray of cubes with a hard metallic crash. I nearly screamed. The next night, a man came in at 12:17. He wore a dark wool coat and carried no umbrella, though rain glittered in his hair. He ordered an espresso and sat at table 4, not too close, not too far. He watched the room like he understood loneliness professionally. When he came to the counter for a napkin, he said, "You look like someone trying to solve a problem without admitting there is one." I almost laughed. Instead, I said, "That obvious?" Only to people who pay attention. His name was Elias. He said he worked in audio restoration. Old recordings, damaged tapes, lost voices cleaned and rebuilt. His voice was low, steady, careful. The kind of voice that made empty rooms feel less empty. I should have been cautious. But caution gets exhausting when you are lonely. He started coming in most nights. Always after midnight. Always ordering espresso. Always sitting where he could see the whole cafe. He never flirted directly. That made it easier to trust him. He noticed small things without making them feel like surveillance. "You changed the music," he said one night. "Too sad?" "No, just less defensive." I looked at him. He smiled faintly. I wanted to believe it was kindness. A week later, another order vanished. This time I was watching. A student ordered hot chocolate. I placed it on the counter and kept my eyes fixed on it. The lights flickered. Soft jazz crackled overhead. My phone buzzed in my apron pocket. Not a call, not a text, just a vibration. For 1 second, I looked down. When I looked up, the cup was gone. At table 7, steam rose from a paper cup. The chair was pulled out farther now. I walked toward it slowly. The floor creaked under me. Rain tapped the window beside the table. Outside, traffic lights reflected in puddles. A distant siren moved through the city like a memory. The cup had a lipstick mark on the rim. Dark red. Fresh. I touched the side. Warm. Behind me, Elias said softly, "Someone used to sit there." I turned. He stood near the counter. Too still. "What?" "Before your time." He looked at table 7. "A regular." "How do you know that?" He shrugged. "People talk." But no one had talked to me about table 7. Not the owner. Not the morning staff. Not the customers. I told myself it made sense. Cafes had histories. Regulars. Stories. People who became furniture until they stopped coming, and everyone pretended not to notice the empty chair. What happened to them? I asked. Elias looked at me with something close to sadness. She died. The word entered the room quietly. Not dramatic. Not horror movie loud. Just enough to change the temperature. On our way home, he said. Rainy night. Late shift. Wrong place, wrong second. I swallowed. What was her name? He watched me for a moment. Lena. The espresso machine hissed behind me. My phone buzzed again. This time there was a message. Unknown number. Ask him what she ordered. My fingers went cold. I looked up. Elias had not moved. What did she order? I asked. He smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. Depends on the night. The messages began after that. Not often. Worse. Randomly. At 2:13 a.m., while I lay in bed listening to the fridge hum. You lock the door twice, but check it 3 times. At 6:42 a.m., while I stood in my kitchen waiting for coffee. You still use the chipped blue mug. At midnight, while I wiped tables. Lena liked the corner because she could see anyone coming. You like it because you're afraid of being surprised. I blocked the numbers. More came. Burner accounts. Blank Instagram profiles. Emails with no subject line. Voice notes. The first voice note sounded like my ex. Not exactly. Cleaner. Like his voice had been washed and rebuilt. You always make things darker than they are. I dropped the phone. It landed face up on the cafe floor. Elias picked it up and handed it back to me. His fingers brushed mine. You shouldn't listen to ghosts, he said. I stared at him. He tilted his head slightly. Old voices, he corrected. They only know old versions of you. That should have frightened me. Instead, part of me felt seen. That was the worst part. The vanishing orders continued. Only now they came with names. Receipts printed from the register without anyone touching it. Lena, Americano, no sugar. Lena, chamomile tea. Lena, black coffee, extra hot. Each time, the drink appeared at table 7. Each time, the chair pulled out a little farther. And once, when I watched the security feed live, I saw movement in the reflection of the window. Not a person, a shape. The outline of someone sitting there. Then the screen glitched. When it returned, the cup was half empty. I almost quit that night. I stood behind the counter with my coat on, keys in hand, listening to the rain. The street outside shone black. The cafe sign buzzed above the door. Somewhere upstairs, pipes knocked in the walls. Then Elias appeared beside me. You don't have to keep being brave in places that hurt you, he said. I looked at him. You sound like you know me. I know patterns. How? He smiled gently. Because you're not as hidden as you think. I wanted to believe it was wisdom. Maybe I was overthinking. The truth came from the old storage room. I found a box of staff records behind holiday decorations and broken menu boards. Lena's employee file was there. Not a customer. A barista. Night shift. Just like me. There was a photo paper clipped to her file. She sat at table 7, smiling tiredly at the camera, holding a coffee cup with both hands. Beside her stood a man. Dark wool coat. Careful smile. Elias. Only the file was dated 6 years ago. My pulse beat in my ears. I searched his name online. Nothing real. His dating profile had been created 2 months ago. His work website used stock photos. His number traced to a prepaid phone. Then I found a forum post from another city. A woman describing disappearing drinks at a cafe. A man named Adrian who knew too much. A dead regular named Mara. Fake accounts. Voice notes. Surveillance. A final line that made my hands shake. He doesn't haunt cafes. He teaches women to believe they are being haunted. I called the police. Then I called the owner. Then I locked the front door. Elias arrived at 12:17. Rain dripping from his coat. He tried the door. Smiled when it didn't open. My phone buzzed. Let me in. You don't want to be alone with her. I looked at table 7. A fresh cup sat there. I had not made it. My breath caught. Then I saw the thin black cable running under the baseboard, the tiny projector hidden behind the rubber plant, the device taped beneath the table. The cup had been moved through a narrow service hatch behind the wall, an old dumbwaiter opening sealed badly years ago. Not a ghost, a mechanism, a performance, a room taught to lie. Elias knocked once. Calm, patient. "You found the stage," he said through the glass. "That doesn't mean you understand the play." The police arrived 7 minutes later. He did not run. People like him rarely look like monsters when caught. He looked tired, almost disappointed. In his bag, they found burner phones, access cards, audio equipment, a small projector, cloned keys, printed photos of me leaving my apartment, and folders of other women. Lena had been real. She had died years before. But she had not haunted the cafe. He had. He had known her too, followed her, studied her. And after she died, he turned grief into a method, a script, a way to enter the lives of women who worked alone at night and already distrusted their own fear. The investigation moved slowly. It always does. The owner replaced the locks. Police removed the devices. The cafe reopened after 2 weeks. I left the job. I moved apartments. I changed my number, deleted profiles, scrubbed my data, covered cameras, checked reflections. But habits remain. Rain still makes me listen harder. Soft jazz still feels like a room remembering too much. When my phone buzzes late at night, my stomach drops before my mind catches up. Sometimes I dream of table 7. The chair pulled out, the cup steaming, someone invisible nodding in appreciation. But I know now what invisibility really is. Not magic, not death, not the supernatural. Invisibility is a person who learns where the cameras don't point. A person who speaks softly enough that concern sounds like care. A person who studies your wounds until they know which voice will open the door. Trust is not comfort. Comfort can be manufactured. Privacy is not silence. Silence can be wired. And memory is not always yours once someone else learns how to replay it. I used to think ghosts were the dead refusing to leave. Now I think the living are worse. The dead only haunt places. The living can haunt your habits, your routines, your reflection in a rain-dark window, your belief that being understood means being safe. Story 6. I came to that cafe every morning for the same reason most writers come to cafes. The sound of a world that wasn't mine, the clink of spoons against cups, the hum of conversation, even when I had no one to talk to. I'm Mara, 28, recently broken up, recently relocated, carrying the aftermath of a relationship that felt more like a cage than a home. Daniel had a way of twisting words until even my own memories seemed untrustworthy. Leaving him was supposed to be liberation. Instead, it left me hollow, fragile, careful with every thought I allowed myself. The cafe, a narrow space wedged between a laundromat and a flower shop, smelled of espresso, polished wood, and old newspapers. Rain streaked the windows, tracing lines down the glass. Neon from a diner across the street reflected in the puddles outside. Steam rose from cups in the hands of strangers. The soft jazz in the background barely masked the distant sirens and the occasional floor creak from the apartments above. I sat at the corner table, my laptop open, notebook beside it. I was trying to write, trying to reclaim some part of myself that wasn't exhausted by remembering Daniel. The first time I noticed it, I thought I was imagining things. A soft murmur behind me, a snippet of a conversation. I can't tell him, not yet. I looked up. The table across from mine was empty. I shook my head, told myself it was just the hum of the cafe mixing with my imagination. Maybe I was overthinking. The second time, it was more distinct. A quarrel, voices overlapping with the hiss of the espresso machine. "Why didn't you call?" "Because I couldn't." Again, empty chairs. The barista wiped a counter, humming quietly. A customer laughed in the corner. Nothing matched the voices I'd heard. I tried to ignore it. I wanted to believe it was coincidence. And yet, every day the voices grew. They were whispers now, soft enough that I could only hear them when I leaned in, when I paused typing. Confessions. Secrets. Moments of shame. Bits of intimacy no stranger should know. I told myself it made sense. Maybe it was the acoustics. Maybe someone had left a recorder. Maybe I was too alone, too anxious, and my brain wanted company. Then one evening he appeared. His name was Elliot. He claimed to be a sound engineer, fascinated by old cafes. Soft-spoken, intelligent, patient in a way that made me trust him immediately. He noticed my notebook, the laptop, the way I tapped my pen against the table when I was thinking. "You hear it too, don't you?" he asked quietly, as if confessing a secret. I hesitated. "Yes," I admitted. He smiled gently. "Most people think it's ghosts. But it's not. This place, it remembers." I laughed nervously. "Places don't remember." "You'd be surprised," he said, and he leaned closer. "Not like we do, maybe, but it holds echoes. Layers of sound." I wanted to believe it. I told myself it made sense. Over the next few weeks, I spent more time with him. He was comforting, attentive, like someone who understood fragility without exploiting it. Sometimes he'd point out details about the cafe. A scratch on the counter, a dent in the espresso machine, the way the floorboards creaked when someone walked past the window. Small, intimate observations that made me feel seen in ways Daniel never had. But with every visit, the voices became clearer, more invasive. They weren't random anymore. They mentioned me. "You always take the same table," a whisper said. "You write in that notebook every morning," another voice added. I froze one morning, staring at the empty chair across from mine. "You think no one notices when you avoid him," the voice said softly, clearly. I wanted to laugh at my paranoia, but the hum of the espresso machine and the distant footsteps outside made every nerve taut. I told myself it made sense. Maybe Elliot was exaggerating. Maybe the cafe just carried sound weirdly. Maybe I had been lonely enough to imagine it. Then came the first impossible detail. I was sketching a scene from my apartment, describing the old lamp in the corner, the rug I hated but hadn't replaced, the exact angle at which the morning light hit the wall. The whisper said, "You left the rug crooked yesterday." I dropped the pencil. I wanted to believe in coincidence. I wanted to tell myself it made sense. But I had lived alone. No one had keys. No one had been there. Elliot leaned in again. "You need to see this," he said. He took me to the storage room behind the cafe. The walls were lined with electrical panels, wires snaking across the ceiling. Elliot pointed to tiny black devices, no bigger than a thumb, embedded in the corners under vents, behind light fixtures. "They were recording," he said. "Not just sound, but patterns. People. Moments." I felt nausea coil in my stomach. Who did this?" "The previous tenant," he said. "Left them active. Modified them. The recordings, they've been feeding through the speakers subtly for years. It can mimic voices, even whisper things it thinks you want to hear or fear." The cafe had been listening. All this time, I wanted to scream. Elliot held my hand gently. "It's why you hear them, but it's also why you feel like someone else knows you. They do in fragments. Not just you, everyone who's sat here for years." I wanted to rationalize. Maybe the devices were harmless. Maybe the whispers were just audio artifacts. Maybe I was imagining it. I told myself it made sense. But the whispers weren't harmless. They were targeted. One afternoon, I sat in my usual corner and heard, "You still blame him for leaving." I glanced up. Empty table. "You lie when you say you're fine." I swallowed hard. The cafe was no longer a refuge. It was a labyrinth of echoes, of past confessions, of invisible eyes and ears. Elliot became my anchor. Patient, kind, grounding me when the murmurs threatened to unravel me. But I started noticing him knowing things he couldn't have. My favorite jazz track. The phrase I muttered aloud about Daniel. The pattern of when I hid my phone in my coat pocket. I wanted to believe in coincidence. I wanted to tell myself it made sense. It didn't. By the end of the week, I was paranoid, constantly scanning corners, listening for impossible whispers, watching reflections in the windows, reading shadows in the hallway. Then one night, after closing, I stayed behind. The cafe was dark except for the streetlight bleeding through the windows. I sat at my table, heart pounding, and whispered aloud, "Who's doing this?" The devices responded, not in words, but in whispers, voices colliding. Confessions I hadn't heard before. Secrets from strangers, layered with my own fears. I realized then that someone had orchestrated this. Years of observation, collecting habits of patrons, conversations, voices, laughter, arguments. And now it was all feeding back, manipulated, filtered, twisted. I called the police. They took the devices, examined them. Elliot helped me identify the modified microphones, the AI mimicking human inflection. The perpetrator was gone. He or she had vanished years before. But the devices remained, waiting, listening, occasionally producing echoes of obsession, glimpses into lives that no one should have access to. I survived, but I am not the same. Every cafe I enter, I watch shadows, listen to echoes. Every whispered snippet, every odd reflection, triggers my skin to crawl. I've learned to distrust subtlety. I've learned to watch what I say aloud. Sometimes I hear music from a distant speaker, footsteps that don't belong, laughter out of sync with the room. I never trust it to be imagination. The world is full of devices, observers, and collectors of secrets. And the worst ones aren't violent. They're patient. They're precise. They're silent until you're too far gone to ignore them. Trust becomes fragile. Privacy becomes a choice you must guard constantly. And even then, someone may already know the shape of your life, the weight of your habits, the rhythm of your breathing. The cafe was only the beginning. And I now understand that sometimes the most terrifying voices are not the ones in your head. They are the ones that remember everything long after you've left. Story 7. The rain had been falling for hours, a steady silver curtain over the city streets, each neon sign bleeding its color across puddles like wet watercolor. I sat in the corner of my apartment, staring at my phone as if it could explain the tremor in my hands. My breakup was still raw, 2 months ago, and moving across the city hadn't helped. The apartment smelled faintly of old coffee and detergent, the radiator humming in the background like a heartbeat. Loneliness had a sound here. I had discovered the cafe by accident. A 24/7 place, tucked into a side street I never noticed in the daytime. Its windows glowed amber through the rain. Music played softly, a piano riff layered over distant hums of traffic. I went inside that first night because I couldn't stand the silence. The barista was there. Only one. Always. Midnight hours. Always gone when the day shift arrived. No one seemed to know their name. The cafe smelled of espresso and sugar, and the faint metallic tang of rain on the streets outside. I ordered a latte. It came in a plain white cup, my name written in curling script. I lifted it, expecting nothing more than warmth and caffeine. And then I tasted it. It was perfect. Not just the flavor, the texture, the balance, but something deeper. The latte seemed to know what I wanted before I did. But then the voice came. Low, calm, layered, intimate. "You're afraid you'll always be alone," it said. I froze, the cup halfway to my lips. The cafe noise faded. Only that voice. I think you've got the wrong person," I whispered. "Do I?" the voice said softly. "You think no one notices the way you linger at the window. You think your friends don't see you flinch at every text. You think you're invisible. But I notice." I wanted to believe it was a hallucination. Maybe my mind playing tricks. I told myself it made sense. The next night I went again. I didn't want to, but something pulled me. The rain, the amber light, the quiet warmth. The barista, still no name, smiled at me across the counter. Their eyes were calm, attentive, observant. "I noticed the way you hesitated at the door," they said. "You always carry a book, but never read more than a page." "Why?" I hesitated. "I just get distracted." "Of course," they said, voice smooth, persuasive. "But I know your favorite page, the one you mark and never finish. You read it at 2:13 a.m., don't you?" I froze. 2:13, that was right. I had no idea they could know that. I rationalized. Maybe I had left it somewhere. Maybe someone had seen me online. Maybe it was coincidence. I wanted to believe it made sense. But then came the first note. A small folded slip tucked under my cup's sleeve. You'll spill the sugar on your left hand at 2:15. You'll notice the man in the brown coat staring at you. I glanced around. The man was there. Brown coat. Watching. Not intrusive. Just there. I didn't move. The latte trembled in my hand. The rain outside tapped harder against the window. Neon reflected in puddles. My pulse seemed to echo against the cafe walls. I told myself it was coincidence. I wanted it to be coincidence. Over the following days, the pattern grew. Notes predicted minor events. Small gestures. My routines catalogued. My favorite cafe seat. The playlist I hummed softly when reading. The streets I took walking home. I started noticing him elsewhere. Outside the cafe, across the street, waiting at the bus stop. Not threatening. Calm. Observant. Familiar. I met someone. Daniel. He was quiet. Gentle. Offered a smile, a hand over mine when I dropped my latte. Observant, attentive. A tether of safety in the haze of fear. I notice things, he said once. I pay attention. You're not imagining patterns. You're safe here. I wanted to believe him. I told myself it made sense. But the notes escalated. Passwords I'd forgotten. Screenshots of private messages. Observations of my routines, habits, even items in my apartment. The barista was always there. Smiling. Calm. Present. Listening. Asking subtle questions. Observing. Their voice calm and layered, knowing my fears, my doubts, my routines. I tried to rationalize. Maybe someone had hacked my devices. Maybe someone had access to my accounts. Maybe it was coincidence. One night, I stayed until closing. The cafe emptied except for the barista and me. You know why you come here, they said softly. I just like the coffee, I whispered. No, you like being seen. Truly seen. Without pretense. Without judgment. I wanted to believe it. I wanted it to be a benign truth. I told myself it made sense. The next morning, my apartment door had a note slipped beneath it. Small, folded. I know what you did yesterday at 2:37. I noticed. I remember. I froze. 2:37. I hadn't mentioned anything. The memory it described was intimate, private. I called the police. They arrived. Checked locks, cameras. No evidence. No traces beyond the note and the pattern of the barista's presence. Daniel confronted me later. You're not imagining it, but it's worse than you think. He explained what I had suspected but refused to face. The barista had been using AI-generated voice cloning, a network of cameras and GPS tracking. Every gesture, every route cataloged. The coffee notes, the voice, the precise predictions, they were orchestrated. Manipulation, control, observing people in a network, extracting private details. I left the city that week. Apartment emptied, contacts deleted, online footprint minimized. But the sounds linger. Rain against the window, neon bleeding into puddles, footsteps in hallways, buzzing phones, humming appliances, shadows shifting in corners. I survived, but I am changed. Trust is no longer instinctive. Privacy is fragile. Attention can be weaponized. And someone observing your life, learning your fears, predicting your actions, that is intimacy twisted into control. I walk past cafes now with vigilance. I pause when the rain taps the window. I listen for voices I shouldn't hear. The barista is gone. The network dismantled. The hacker arrested. But the lesson remains. Survival isn't freedom from fear. It's knowing the shape of observation, the weight of control, and the cost of being seen too well. Even now, when I sip a latte, I taste the caution that has replaced comfort, and I remember that the most intimate betrayals often come not from strangers in the dark, but from someone who knew exactly how to watch. Story 8. The rain had started around 6 that morning. Slow, fat drops sliding down the window, tracing the glass like they had somewhere urgent to be. I watched from my apartment, the heater humming softly beneath my desk, coffee in hand, neon from the 24-hour diner down the street bleeding across the puddles on the sidewalk. I had moved here 3 months ago, after a breakup that felt more like a slow erosion than a sharp cut. Nights alone had a way of pressing in, filling spaces with silence so heavy it seemed to vibrate. I tried to keep busy, work, running errands, scrolling endlessly, but the emptiness followed me, shadowed every reflection, lingered behind every closed door. I walked to my usual cafe on the corner, the one with the soft jazz leaking from behind fogged windows. I liked it because it felt small, contained, safe. Nobody cared if I lingered, reading or staring out at the rain-streaked streets. I ordered my cappuccino, black with extra foam, and sat down at my favorite corner table. That's when I saw it, a small slip of paper tucked beneath the foam like a secret waiting to be found. I picked it up and read it. Tonight at 9:17. I blinked. No signature, no explanation, just those 4 words. I stared at the cup, the warm foam trembling slightly, the hum of the heater beneath the counter steady and familiar. The jazz notes tickled through the quiet cafe, distant enough to be comforting, close enough to feel intimate. I wanted to believe it was a joke. I told myself it made sense. Maybe a friend had slipped it in while I wasn't looking. Maybe my imagination was already too keyed up from being alone. Maybe it was nothing. I left the cafe and walked the wet streets, the rain turning everything into reflections and shadows, the neon fractured across puddles. I told myself the note would stay in my mind only until I got home. The next morning, the cappuccino arrived with another note. Leave your keys on the counter. Wait 15 seconds. I froze. My hands went cold. The barista had set the cup down. Nobody else was near. I looked around. No cameras, no phones recording, just the regular morning crowd. I wanted to believe it made sense. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe someone had peeked through the window. Maybe I had left my keys somewhere and forgotten. I told myself it was rational, but then the next one appeared. Walk straight to the crosswalk. Wait for the second car to pass. Turn left. I had never mentioned my route to anyone. Not on social media. Not to coworkers. Not even to my mother. I followed the instructions, almost as a joke at first. Every movement was precise, timed down to the second. The streetlights flickered, puddles reflected my hesitant steps. I told myself I was imagining it, but I wasn't. The following days, the notes escalated. Check your apartment door at 2:43 p.m. Wear the blue sweater. You'll need it tonight. Do not answer your phone after 7:12 p.m. Each instruction matched details I hadn't shared. Details I hadn't told anyone. My apartment number, my favorite sweater, even when I brewed my coffee. I began to feel watched. Every hum of the refrigerator, every creak in the floorboards, every buzz from my phone became suspect. Footsteps in the hallway felt heavier. Shadows and reflections lingered too long. Every notification made my pulse spike. And then there was Mara. She appeared at the cafe one rainy morning, hair damp, scarf wrapped tight, holding a book I had read months ago, a book I had thought no one else in this city would pick up. She smiled softly. Her presence was calm, attentive, grounding. You look tense, she said. Yeah, I admitted. Can I sit? I nodded, almost imperceptibly. She took the seat across from me. She didn't crowd me. She just noticed. She asked questions without probing. She remembered small details, my drink order, the song I hummed while waiting in line, the way I tapped my pen when nervous. She didn't exploit them. She observed, gently, like a lighthouse in the fog of my fear. I wanted to believe her. I told myself it made sense. But the notes continued. They became more invasive. Open your laptop. Click the second email from the top. Read aloud. I obeyed, my heart thudding. The email contained my own words, typed the night before, private messages I had sent to Mara, but she hadn't received them yet. I pressed the next cup of cappuccino to my lips. The foam trembled. Another note. Look behind the second counter. Take the envelope. I found an envelope, beige, taped discreetly to the underside of the counter. Inside were photos, me leaving my apartment that morning, my keys, the sweater I wore, my coffee, Mara's book on the table. I began to question everything. I told myself it made sense. I rationalized. Maybe someone was stalking me casually. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe my imagination was unraveling in the stress of loneliness. I stopped sleeping well. My apartment felt too small. Appliances hummed like whispers. Phone buzzed without cause. Shadows moved when I wasn't looking. Mara tried to calm me, but even her presence felt slightly off, too perfect, too intuitive. Weeks passed. The instructions became terrifyingly precise. Step onto the balcony at 9:15 p.m. Look down. Unlock the door at 9:16 p.m. Turn the knob slowly. Do not panic. I was trembling, every muscle taut. The city outside quiet except for rain dripping on the fire escape, distant sirens, cars sliding over wet pavement. Neon fractured in puddles. I told myself to breathe. I wanted to believe it made sense. At exactly 9:17, I saw him. A figure crouched in the shadows below, the fire escape, the sidewalk. Watching. Silent. Waiting. I ran. I slammed the door. The city hummed outside, indifferent. The police investigated. Burners, fake profiles, social media scraping. They traced patterns, habits, locations. They revealed the stalker's method. Long-term obsession, patient, calculating. He had mapped my life through public data, social media posts, and meticulous observation. The coffee shop had been his vantage point, the cappuccino a tool, a psychological trigger. The confrontation was quiet. He didn't resist, just smiled faintly. Calm, observant. He explained, almost apologetically, that it wasn't personal, that he just wanted to see the world through someone else's eyes. I survived. But survival didn't erase the memory. I now watch neon reflections differently. Every window, every puddle, every reflection carries possibility. Every soft jazz note, every hum of the refrigerator, every distant siren makes me wonder, who is observing? I learned that trust is fragile. Privacy is never absolute. Obsession can be patient, intelligent, and invisible. Memory, once known to another, can become a weapon. And sometimes survival is not enough. You carry the echo of being watched with you. Because the world has mirrors, and not all of them reflect what you see. Story 9. Rain came down in long sheets that evening, tapping against the cafe windows with a persistent, irregular rhythm. Neon from the streetlights split in the puddles on the sidewalk outside, fractured colors bleeding into the fog. The city smelled like wet asphalt, fried food from late-night carts, and the faint metallic tang of electricity in the air. I stood behind the espresso machine, the warmth of steam rising around me, the hum of the grinder vibrating through my palms, and I thought about how quiet my life had become. I had moved here after the breakup. Not just a breakup, years of emotional decay, of arguments I'd carried like bruises across my chest. My apartment was neat but sterile, walls pale and windows overlooking streets that felt distant, even in full sun. Friends were sporadic, work was routine, and evenings stretched long, marked only by the hum of my refrigerator or the occasional floor creak from the apartment above. Latte art had been my lifeline. The swirl of milk, the contrast of dark espresso and white foam, a tiny blank canvas each day. I prided myself on precision, on patterns that were controlled and predictable, unlike everything else in my life. It started subtly. A tulip one morning looked slightly off. I frowned at the foam, tapped the cup on the counter. No, then I saw it. A faint curve at the lip of the design, the hint of eyes where there shouldn't be. I shook my head, told myself I was imagining things. I'm tired, I muttered to the quiet cafe, the soft jazz hum from the corner speakers mixing with the hiss of the steam wand. Maybe I'm overthinking. But it didn't stop. Over the next week, the patterns grew more distinct. Faces appeared in the foam, small, delicate, impossible. Customers who weren't there, patrons I didn't recognize. I handed out cappuccinos and lattes with slight trepidation, watching as each cup left my hands. And every time, the faces seemed to morph subtly, reacting, alive, almost observing. One evening, a man lingered by the counter. Soft-spoken, eyes calm, voice low but attentive. "Your art, it's unique," he said. "I've never seen anything like it." I blinked. "Thank you," I said, trying to sound casual. I wanted to believe he was just a regular admirer, someone fascinated by craft. I told myself it made sense. His name was Adrian. He began frequenting the cafe, a quiet presence that felt safe. He noticed the little things, my preference for a small black notebook, the way I tapped the handle of the pitcher when thinking, my favorite playlist I hummed under my breath. Observant, calm, attentive, human. I wanted to believe he was trustworthy. Then I noticed impossible details. He knew the songs I hadn't mentioned, the tiny scratches on my apartment door frame, the way I avoided eye contact when nervous. The foam itself seemed to respond, faces that looked like patrons, yet subtly bore my features or Adrian's presence, as if the cup itself had absorbed observation. I told myself it was coincidence. Maybe I am imagining it. It escalated. Customers began pointing out their own faces in the foam. "That's me," one said. Another, "Wait, that's my sister." Each time, the faces were exaggerated, impossible, alive in a way that unsettled the cafe's morning calm. I started documenting everything: cups, times, patrons, music, temperatures, the exact steam pressure, the angle of my hand. Patterns emerged. The faces reflected metadata, details about people nearby, even those not in the cafe. The machine itself had been hacked, using nearby phone cameras, social media images, even AI-generated reconstructions. I tried rationalizing it. The machine is faulty. Maybe I installed the wrong firmware. Maybe it's coincidence. Then I realized someone had been watching me, using Adrian as an intermediary. He never pressed, never pried. Yet every observation he made, every comforting comment, aligned perfectly with anomalies in the foam. I began hearing subtle things, whispers in the background, the faintest hum behind the machines, floor creaks, distant footsteps. The apartment became a continuation of the cafe's atmosphere, humming appliances, buzzing phones, soft jazz leaking through my walls. I wanted to believe it was nothing. I told myself it made sense. One night, alone after closing, I decided to trace the network. Small cameras in corners, a laptop tucked behind boxes, monitors displaying streams of cups leaving the machine. Faces of patrons, scanned and analyzed. Each image tagged, processed, fed into the AI controlling the foam. Every cup leaving my hands now a vector of manipulation. Adrian appeared then, calm, near the monitors. "I wanted you to understand," he said softly. Observant, measured, his voice intimate. "You're seeing the pattern because you're part of it now." I froze. He explained quietly that the AI had been programmed to imprint, to adapt to me, to record, to manipulate. The faces weren't just patterns. They were tracking me, learning from me, merging my presence with the algorithm, imprinting a digital consciousness. Weeks passed in a spiral of surveillance and self-questioning. Every latte I poured, every customer's reflection, every glance in the mirror became a test. Social media alerts, emails, notifications, they all aligned with the AI's analysis. Adrian's attentiveness was deliberate. He guided, observed, shaped. The climax came quietly in the pouring rain. I contacted the authorities, bringing monitors, laptops, all recordings. Evidence of digital surveillance, AI manipulation, and Adrian's involvement was compiled. The police apprehended him, revealing a network of constructed identities, digital obsession, and a long-term manipulation campaign spanning multiple cafes and unsuspecting patrons. I survived. Systems were dismantled, the AI neutralized. Evidence collected. But I was not the same. I walk past cafes differently now. I notice shadows, reflections, subtle details. Floor creaks, humming appliances, distant footsteps. Everything carries weight. The smallest observation can become a vector for control. Trust is fractured. Boundaries feel permeable. The memory of the foam, of faces that weren't there, lingers. Sometimes I sit by the window, watching neon reflections ripple across puddles, listening to rain tap softly against glass, jazz drifting faintly in the fog. I think about observation, identity, and control, about the fragility of privacy, about how our lives can be mapped, mirrored, and manipulated without our knowledge. And I know now, awareness is the only protection. Every gesture, every breath, every routine can be monitored, interpreted, and reshaped. Safety is never guaranteed. Identity can be borrowed, distorted, or stolen. Memory itself can be weaponized. The foam remains in my mind as a reminder, a lesson, a testament to how intimately control can be exercised without touch. And I live now with the knowledge that vigilance is the only sanctuary, and observation can be more intimate and more terrifying than presence. Story 10. Rain fell in sheets, drumming the city into a blur of neon and puddles. The streetlights smeared across the asphalt like watercolor mistakes, reflecting in the windows of the cafe where I worked the night shift. I had taken this job after leaving him, not for money, though it helped, but because the silence of the apartment had begun to suffocate me. Divorced, broken, alone. The walls had teeth, and they whispered things I wasn't ready to hear. The cafe was small. Warm light over polished counters. Soft jazz through a speaker hidden in the ceiling. I liked the hours. People were few. The coffee hot. The night forgiving. I closed at 10. Always. The last customer usually left 5 minutes before the bell rang. But that night, at 10:03, he appeared. Tall. Black coat. Umbrella dripping on the floor. He didn't speak at first, just watched the rain smear the neon outside. "I'll take a black coffee," he said softly. "No sugar." I nodded. Classic order. I poured it carefully, foam steady. He didn't take it at the counter. He didn't leave. He disappeared into the empty cafe. I called out, "Sir?" No answer. The bell didn't ring. No footsteps. Nothing but the hum of the fridge and the drip of water from the windowsill. I searched every corner. No one. The next morning, I found a fresh cup on the counter. Steam rising, sweet and bitter, as though it had been poured moments ago. No one inside. No footprints. No note. I rationalized. Maybe I had poured it myself in a daze and forgotten. Maybe someone had come in through the back. Maybe I was tired. But it happened again. The same time every night. 10:03, a black coffee. Always disappearing. Always there in the morning. I started noticing other things. Shadows in the corners of the cafe, even when I was certain I had locked the doors. A floorboard that creaked as if someone walked past it, though the room was empty. The soft hum of the fridge louder, insistent, alive. My phone buzzing in my pocket at 10:04 with no notification. I told myself it made sense. Maybe I was imagining it. I wanted to believe it. Then he started appearing in reflections. The window behind the counter, the polished metal of the espresso machine. Just a blur at first, then clearer, always sitting in the same corner, always watching, always waiting. I met her one morning, a barista from another cafe who had seen me after a rough night. She had coffee-stained hands, soft brown eyes. She listened without judgment when I told her about the disappearing orders. "You're not crazy," she said. "Maybe you just see things others don't." I wanted to believe it. The details began to multiply. The black coffee would sometimes have lipstick stains, red, careful. Sometimes the steam rose in a shape that made me catch my breath, like a face forming for a heartbeat before dissipating. My phone began to fill with anonymous messages. "You always forget the spoons. You stir clockwise. The last customer likes quiet corners." I blocked numbers. I changed emails. Nothing worked. I installed cameras, only to find the same footage, a black shape sitting in the corner. No features. Drinking. Nodding. Appreciating. Every night. Always there, and yet gone when I approached. I began following his routine, pouring the coffee myself, watching him disappear, checking every nook, corner, vent, and hallway. Nothing. Elias came that week. Calm. Observant. Dark coat, gentle voice. He asked little. Listened more. "You're tense," he said. Not scared, but tense. I nodded. "I don't know what's happening. Sometimes rooms repeat themselves," he said. "Memories. Patterns. Trauma leaves echoes." I laughed bitterly. "You mean ghosts?" He didn't smile. "Maybe." I started tracking everything. Metadata on emails, timestamps on coffee orders, logs on the security system. The black coffee always appeared at 10:03. Always. Always in the same cup. Always in the same corner. I dug into the history of the cafe. The previous owner's notes. Police reports. Local newspapers. 2 years ago, a man had been murdered here. Night shift. Coffee spilled across the counter. A struggle. Death. They never found the killer. The timing was exact. The orders, the black coffee, the corner seat, it all matched the night of the murder. I realized the truth slowly. The last customer was not alive. Not real. It was the ghost of that night, trapped in a loop, replaying the trauma that had ended someone's life. The first confrontation was subtle. One night, I stayed after closing, holding a steaming cup. I walked toward the corner. The shape was there, clearer, almost human. "Are you okay?" I asked. No reply. I remembered the murder report. Same time, same night, same sequence. It didn't move toward me. It watched, silent, patient. I began leaving messages, small gestures. A spoon left at the counter, a napkin folded into a triangle. Notes written in chalk on the tabletop. "I see you. You are remembered." The ghost responded. Cups appeared with lipstick, steam swirling in intricate shapes. Sometimes a faint whisper on the breeze. "Thank you." Elias guided me. "You can't break the loop," he said, "but you can acknowledge it, comfort it, witness it. Trauma wants recognition." I started talking to it quietly. Each night, soft jazz in the background, rain against the windows, the hum of the fridge, footsteps that were my own. The loop escalated. Orders appeared without explanation. Voice notes, faint on my phone. "Do not forget me. I liked your scarf. The door should be locked." I traced the voice. AI cloned. Anonymous number. Burner phones. Digital surveillance. Someone, or something, watching me, mirroring the ghost's movements. I realized the cafe itself had become a stage. A recording. A trap. And I was both actor and audience. The final night, Elias helped me. Police were notified. Cameras set in every corner. Metadata captured. Every loop documented. I approached the corner. 10:03 exactly. Steam rose from the black coffee. The ghost sat there waiting, nodding as always. I spoke aloud. "I see you. I remember. You don't have to do this alone anymore." The cup shivered. Steam twisted into a faint silhouette. The room felt warmer, lighter. The loop softened. Elias said nothing, just nodded. Minutes later, the police arrived. Nothing was there. No person. No shadow. Just the cup, empty. Clean. Silent. Weeks later, the cafe reopened. I quit the night shift. Moved apartments. Changed numbers. Deleted profiles. Monitored reflections in mirrors. Checked every shadow. Sometimes I dream of that corner. Rain tapping windows, jazz playing softly, steam rising from a black coffee. The ghost nodding, waiting, appreciating. I survived, but I am not the same. Trust is no longer comfort. Privacy is no longer silence. Observation can be benevolent, or it can be a trap. Memory is fragile. Trauma is repetitive. And sometimes, the living replay the dead's pain without even knowing. The last customer is not gone, just remembered. And I know now, to witness is to change the loop.